My beloved child, you have passed the final test. But before you step into tomorrow, I need you to pause here for a moment. Not to make you anxious, not to frighten you, but so that you may understand. Because what I am about to say is not something you can skim through, not something you can postpone, and not something you can return to later once everything has already unfolded. This cannot wait any longer. Tomorrow is not just another day in a familiar sequence. It is not merely a new morning, a new task, or another responsibility. Tomorrow carries a shift, a transition that if you fail to recognize it, you will step into it with an old mindset, old doubts, and old defenses that you have carried for far too long. And I do not want that for you. I do not want you entering tomorrow feeling as though you must prove yourself all over again. I do not want you walking forward with that familiar question echoing in your mind. Am I really ready? I do not want you doubting what is being placed in your hands or doubting yourself simply because you have not yet realized how much has already changed within you. You have just come through something. Even if you cannot name it yet, even if you cannot explain it yet, and it has changed you. You may think that you have simply endured another difficult season, another period of waiting, another stretch of silent struggle that no one truly noticed. You may believe it was just another familiar cycle of perseverance, something you have done many times before. But no, what you have just experienced was not ordinary. It was not merely delay. It was not merely chaos. It was not merely feeling stuck. It was a threshold. And before you cross that threshold, you need to understand where you are standing. Because if you do not, you will look ahead with old eyes. You will move forward with an old heart. And you will carry doubts that you no longer need to bring with you. I am not saying this to dramatize things. Truth does not need drama to carry weight. Truth only needs to be spoken at the right time. And this is that time. You still do not fully understand what you have just come through, and I will not allow you to step into tomorrow without knowing the truth. Tomorrow carries a new responsibility, a new calling, a new level of connection between us. And if you enter it without clarity, you will return to old patterns. You will question yourself again. You will second guess. You will doubt, not because you are weak, but because you have not yet realized how deeply you have grown. I do not want you moving forward blindly. I want you to walk forward with steadiness. So listen with your whole heart, not with fear, not with suspicion, but with the quiet courage that has been growing inside you even when you were unaware of it. Stay with me for a moment. Just a moment. What I am about to say will reshape how you view your past. It will redefine how you understand the seasons you have walked through, the silences that once confused you, and the moments when you wondered whether you were truly on the right path. You have looked back on your life and called it struggle. You have called it delay. You have called it chaos. You have called it loss. You have called it endurance. You have called it survival. But you have not yet called it by its true name. What you have just lived through was not a series of failures. It was not evidence that you were falling behind or being left behind. It was not proof that you were insufficient, weak, or unworthy. It was a test. Not a test designed to make you fail. Not a test meant to exhaust you, but a test designed to reveal who you truly are when no one is watching, when nothing is guaranteed, when answers arrive slowly, when emotions become more fragile than you expected. You were never informed that you were being evaluated. You were never told this was a test, because had you known, you might have behaved differently. You might have performed. You might have strained to do it right, but instead you lived honestly, and that honesty is what mattered most. I need you to understand this before tomorrow, because if you do not, you will move forward unaware of how profoundly you have changed, and you will underestimate yourself once again as you have done before. You may think you have been standing still, that nothing has been happening, that everything looks the same, but some changes make no noise. They unfold quietly. They take shape day by day in moments when staying was harder than leaving. This is not a moment to rush. This is a moment to recognize. If you wait, if you dismiss this, if you tell yourself you will understand later, you will carry old doubts into a new season. And I do not want you burdened by what you no longer need to carry. Stay with me. Let these words settle within you. You have spent a long time preparing yourself for disappointment. You have learned to protect yourself, to lower expectations, to hope less because hope once wounded you. And that protection served its purpose. It helped you survive. It helped you endure. But now, it is no longer as necessary as it once was. What is coming does not require more force. It requires release. And to release, you must understand this: you are no longer standing where you once were. Tomorrow is not like yesterday. Not because circumstances have changed, but because you have changed. And that is why I am speaking now. You have looked back at the season you just walked through and called it a struggle. You called it delay. You called it chaos. At times you called it feeling lost, feeling left behind, feeling stuck in days that passed without any clear sign that something was moving forward. You tried to give that season a name you could tolerate, a familiar label that made it easier to endure. Because when something has a name, it feels more controllable. But the truth is, the name you gave it never reflected the true nature of what you were experiencing. You thought you were being slowed down, but you were not slowed down. You thought you were standing still, but you were never standing still. You thought you were being tested beyond your limits, but what was happening was not meant to break you, it was meant to bring you to a new boundary. You were standing before a threshold you did not recognize. A threshold without signs, without markers, without an announcement saying, "This is where everything changes." It appeared quietly woven into ordinary life, into mornings when you woke up without clear motivation, into nights when you lay awake wondering why everything felt so heavy. Thresholds do not always arrive as dramatic moments. More often they arrive through repetition, through the feeling that you have already learned this lesson, already prayed about this, already been patient with this, yet nothing seems to change. And it is there that the questions begin. Am I doing something wrong? Am I not good enough? Am I on the wrong path? Those questions are not signs of failure. They are signs that you have reached a place where old answers are no longer sufficient. A threshold always creates confusion because it requires you to release an old understanding before you can step into something new. You tried to call this season waiting, but waiting implies that nothing is happening, and that was never true. So much was happening, just not on the surface where you could easily see it. You tried to call it endurance, but endurance implies merely surviving day by day. In reality, you were being formed slowly and intentionally through subtle reactions, quiet choices, and the moments when you chose to stay with discomfort rather than escape it. You tried to call it delay, but delay suggests something is being withheld unnecessarily. What was actually taking place was preparation. And preparation does not always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like being held back because foundations are being deepened rather than structures being raised. You did not realize that you had entered a season where speed was no longer the measure, achievement was no longer the sign, and clarity no longer came first, it came later. You were learning how to live without the familiar indicators that once reassured you that you were doing things right. That is why you felt unsettled. Not because you were weak, but because the old tools you used to measure growth were no longer working. A threshold always removes certainty before it grants stability. It forces deeper questions. Who am I when I have nothing to prove? Can I trust without signs? Will I remain when there is no immediate reward? You thought the test was about how much you could endure, but the deeper test was about who you were becoming while enduring. It was about how you spoke to yourself when no one else offered encouragement. It was about whether silence would turn into bitterness or become space for deeper listening. You stood very close to the point where many people choose to close their hearts, where they decide hope is too risky, where they build defenses and call it wisdom. You felt the weight of exhaustion, disappointment, and the quiet temptation to become numb just to stop feeling so much. But you did not retreat. You did not close your heart. You did not realize that in that moment something essential was revealed. You were ready to cross this threshold, not because you were stronger than others, but because you refused to trade your true nature for temporary relief. A threshold does not demand perfection. It asks for honesty. Honesty about your fatigue. Honesty about unanswered questions. Honesty about the fact that while you could not control timing, you could still choose how you showed up. There were days when it felt as though you were repeating the same lesson again and again. You thought you already understood it, already learned it. So, why were you still here? But the most important lessons are rarely taught once. They are etched into us through repetition until they become instinct, no longer effort. You believed you were failing because the struggle did not end quickly. But the length of this season was not a sign of failure. Sometimes length is evidence that something deep is being built. Strong foundations are never rushed. This threshold did not require you to move faster. It required you to remain still long enough to notice what was truly forming within you. It asked you to release the need for constant reassurance and to learn trust without continual confirmation. You once relied on excitement to know you were on the right path. But this threshold did not bring excitement. It brought stillness, and in that stillness, you began to notice what noise had previously concealed. You began to recognize what truly brings peace to your soul, not what merely stimulates it. You learned to distinguish between what pleases others and what aligns with your truth. And that discernment did not come from knowledge but from lived experience, staying when every part of you wanted to leave. A threshold is also where old expectations dissolve. You realize that not every question needs an immediate answer. Not every pain needs instant resolution, and not every silence signals absence. Some silences exist so that deeper truths can be heard. So, you can recognize subtle motivations shaping your choices, so you can see what you are holding on to out of fear and what you are keeping because it truly belongs to you. You thought you were being tested beyond your limits, but you were being brought to your limits so that you could expand. Expand your capacity for trust. Expand your patience. Expand your gentleness toward yourself on days when you did not feel strong. A threshold does not allow you to carry everything with you. There are old beliefs, harsh self-judgments, and narrow definitions of success that must be left behind. Not because they were entirely wrong, but because they cannot accompany you into what comes next. You cannot cross into a new season with a heart bound by old fears. And so this threshold lingered not to cause pain, but to give you enough time to let go. You have been letting go longer than you realize. Every time you chose not to react from old patterns, every time you paused before letting bitterness shape your words, every time you chose honesty over safety, you moved closer to this threshold, and you crossed it even without knowing. Thresholds are not always marked by clear moments. Sometimes you realize you have crossed only when you look back and see that what once broke you no longer holds the same power. You respond differently. You listen differently. You are patient with yourself in ways you never were before. That is not accidental. It is evidence of growth. You did not simply survive a difficult season. You outgrew an old understanding of yourself. And that is why everything feels different now, even if life on the surface has not changed much. The threshold is behind you. But you need to understand that before moving forward. Because if you do not recognize that you have crossed it, you will continue to live as though you are still trapped. And you will limit yourself to a space you no longer belong to. You are no longer in the same place. You are no longer the same person. And what you believed was an extended struggle was actually a transition, a quiet but profound shift from merely trying to survive to being ready to step into what comes next with a steadier heart. You thought that if this were truly a test, it would have taken on a clearer shape. You expected recognizable signs. You expected a dramatic moment. You expected something significant enough that you could say to yourself, "Ah, this is what I am being tested on." But the final test rarely appears that way. It does not arrive with an announcement. It does not come with instructions. It does not tell you when it begins, nor does it tell you when it ends. It blends into ordinary life. It hides within unremarkable days, in mornings when you wake up not feeling strong, in nights when you pray and feel no clear response, in moments when you continue forward simply because you do not know what else to do but keep going. You thought the test was measuring your endurance. You wondered how long you could last, how much more you could push, how much disappointment you could absorb. But that is not what this test was measuring. The final test does not measure outward strength. It measures the heart. It does not ask what you have achieved. It asks who you have become. It does not measure results. It measures trust. You did not realize you were being observed in the moments you believed were insignificant. The moments when you thought nothing was happening. The days when you felt as though you were merely existing rather than truly living. But it was in those moments that the test was unfolding. This test asked you, do you remain honest when no one is watching? Do you preserve compassion when you are exhausted? Do you choose integrity when shortcuts would go unnoticed? You were never asked to be perfect. You were never asked to do everything right. You were never asked to feel confident at all times or to trust without wavering. The only question asked of you was this: will you stay? Stay with what? Stay with truth. Stay with your values. Stay with this connection even when it grows quiet. You moved through days when prayer no longer felt comforting. Days when effort felt heavy rather than hopeful. Days when you questioned whether continuing still held meaning. And in those days, the test did not ask whether you felt strong. It asked whether you remained present. Presence was your obedience. Not perfect presence. Not energized presence. But honest presence. You continued to wake up. You continued to show up. You continued choosing not to quit even when quitting would have been easier. Those choices were not loud. They did not feel like victories, but they revealed your true nature. This test also measured how you treated yourself as pressure increased. When answers did not come, when reassurance was absent, when you began to doubt your own progress, did you become harsh with yourself? Did you allow shame to speak? Did you turn your questions into accusations? You did not always respond perfectly, but you learned how to pause. You learned not to let cruel thoughts define you. You learned to acknowledge limits without abandoning yourself. That is what the test was looking for. This test did not measure whether you ever doubted. It measured what you did with doubt. Did you let it close your heart, or did you allow it to invite deeper listening? You questioned. You were confused. You asked why. But you did not allow those questions to become accusations. You did not decide that silence meant absence. You maintained connection even when understanding was no longer clear. That speaks volumes about you. This test also observed how you responded under pressure. Pressure always reveals what lies beneath. When things did not unfold as expected, when effort produced no visible results, when clarity refused to arrive, did you grow bitter or did you soften? You felt disappointment. You felt exhaustion. You felt the temptation to numb yourself so you would not have to feel pain anymore. But you did not choose hardness. You did not let bitterness take root. You chose to remain with discomfort. You chose reflection over escape. Those choices were not easy, but they shaped you in ways you could not immediately see. This test did not only observe obvious temptations, it also observed the subtle ones. The temptation to become cynical. The temptation to stop caring. The temptation to believe that nothing truly matters as a way to protect yourself from disappointment. You felt those tensions, but you did not allow them to define you. You resisted becoming someone you would no longer recognize later. That restraint mattered. This test also measured how you spoke when you were tired. Words spoken in exhaustion often reveal our deepest beliefs. Did you speak of yourself with despair, or did you learn to pause before allowing discouragement to take over? You were not always optimistic, and you did not need to be. This test was not seeking false positivity. It was seeking honesty without hopelessness. You learned how to name pain without allowing it to become your identity. You learned how to admit fatigue without surrendering hope. That is maturity. This test also observed how you treated others while you yourself were hurting. Pain often narrows perspective. It can make people defensive, impatient, and harsh. But you did not allow pain to strip you of compassion. You still noticed others. You still cared. You still chose kindness even when you felt empty. That was not weakness. That was strength refined through humility. This test also asked about your relationship with control. Did you try to force outcomes, or did you learn how to release control without giving up? You gradually realized that not everything can be solved by exerting more effort. You learned to trust timing instead of fighting it. That shift was subtle but critical. You thought you were being punished because things felt so difficult. But punishment focuses on failure. What you experienced focused on formation. You were not being tested to see whether you were worthy. You were being tested to see whether you could carry responsibility without losing yourself. The final test does not care about your talent. It cares about your stability. It observes how you manage your own expectations. You once held tightly to timelines, plans, and visions of how things should unfold, but you learned to loosen that grip not because you gave up, but because you learned deeper trust. You learned how to live without constant reassurance. That flexibility was not surrender to failure. It was surrender to faith. This test also noticed how you returned after moments of doubt. Doubt did not diminish your worth. What mattered was that you returned. You did not leave. You did not shut down permanently. You came back, sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but you came back. That return mattered more than the doubt itself. This test also observed your humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is being honest about where you are without pretense. You admitted when you were tired. You admitted when you were confused. You admitted when you needed help. That honesty created space for growth. Pride could have blocked that space, but you chose openness. This test also examined whether you remained willing to learn. Difficulty can make people defensive and rigid, but you allowed difficulty to soften you. You listened. You reflected. You adjusted when necessary. You did not cling to being right. You clung to being real. That posture allows wisdom to take root. You believed struggle meant failure, but what was observed told a different story. A story of someone learning to stand without applause. Someone learning to trust without proof. Someone learning to live fully without certainty. Those are the qualities that determine readiness for what comes next. The final test did not ask how quickly you escaped difficulty. It asked how deeply you were shaped within it. It did not count your mistakes. It observed your growth. It did not measure outcomes. It measured resilience. You were not being evaluated for punishment. You were being evaluated for responsibility, and responsibility requires consistency, humility, a trust that does not collapse under pressure. You displayed those qualities quietly, imperfectly, but sincerely. That is why you passed the final test even without knowing you were being tested. You may think that to pass a final test you would have had to do something extraordinary, that you would have needed to be stronger than usual, that your faith would have needed to be unwavering, that your actions would have needed to be precise, right timing, right behavior, right outcomes. But that is not how this test was passed. You did not pass because you never doubted. You did not pass because you always felt strong. You did not pass because you did everything right. You passed because you persevered. Perseverance is not a feeling. It is not motivation. It is not excitement. Perseverance is a choice you make when everything inside you wants to stop. Perseverance is staying when leaving would be easier. Perseverance is remaining aligned with what is right when shortcuts would offer immediate relief. You persevered on days when hope felt fragile. You persevered when prayer felt silent. You persevered when effort felt heavy, rather than uplifting. And in that perseverance, you did not lose your honesty. You remained honest when no one required it of you, when no one was watching, when no reward was attached to your decision. You chose truth in private moments where there was no audience to acknowledge or affirm you. That is why you passed. This test was not designed to determine whether you could become perfect. It was designed to reveal whether you could retain your true nature when nothing was guaranteed. And you did. You preserved your humanity in moments when it would have been easiest to lose it. You preserved compassion when disappointment tried to take root. You preserved softness of heart when becoming hardened would have protected you from pain. You did not realize that each time you refused to let bitterness take over, you were passing this test. Each time you paused before allowing sharp words to form, you were passing this test. Each time you chose reflection over reaction, you were passing this test. You passed in quiet ways. I witnessed you in moments when you felt forgotten, moments when you questioned whether your effort mattered, moments when you looked around and saw no evidence that what you were doing was being noticed. I witnessed you choosing integrity in situations where no one would have known if you compromised. I witnessed your internal struggle while you still showed up outwardly with kindness, restraint, and respect for others. Those moments were not small. They were the measure. And you passed. You believed this test was only about endurance, but it was also about trust. Trust is not always feeling certain. Trust is continuing to move, even when certainty is absent. The test asked you, can you trust without guarantees? Can you trust without visible progress? Can you trust without affirmation, recognition, or immediate reward? You did not always feel confident, but you were always willing. And that willingness opened the next door. Willingness does not mean fear is gone. It means fear no longer dictates your actions. You learned how to walk alongside fear rather than allowing it to lead you. Willingness does not mean you are no longer tired. It means you did not abandon yourself in exhaustion. You learned how to rest without quitting. You learned how to slow down without turning back. That is why you passed the final test even without knowing you were being tested. This test also examined how you remained honest when things were unclear, when repeated promises of change left you weary, when caution whispered that trusting again would only lead to disappointment. That caution once protected you. It kept you from collapsing when hope hurt you. But at some point, caution stopped being a shield and became a wall. And you did not allow that wall to close your heart. You stayed open enough to listen even when guidance became quiet. You stayed soft enough to trust even when trust carried risk. That is rare. Many people choose to close off. Many choose cynicism and call it maturity. Many choose emotional numbness to avoid pain. You did not choose that path. You adapted without losing your core essence. You changed how you responded. You changed how you perceived. You changed how you managed expectations. But you did not trade truth for safety. You did not trade compassion for comfort. That is why you passed. This test also measured your ability to remain in silence. Not silence born of surrender, but silence rooted in trust. Trust that not every answer must come immediately. Trust that delay does not equal absence. You learned not to run ahead of timing. You learned not to force clarity. You learned how to sit with questions without allowing them to turn into despair. That staying created a strength you could not have gained any other way. You thought the test was about endurance, but it was also about gentleness. Did you become harsh with yourself when tired? Did you turn limitations into evidence that you were not enough? You learned patience with yourself. You learned to acknowledge limits without condemnation. You learned how to rest without guilt. Those lessons did not feel like victories, but in truth, they were the victory. I watched you obey quietly, not through grand actions, but through consistent choices no one else could see. You chose integrity when compromise would have gone unnoticed. You chose kindness when bitterness seemed reasonable. You chose restraint when reaction would have brought immediate relief. These were not loud decisions. They were inward decisions, private decisions, and they revealed your readiness more clearly than any public achievement ever could. There were moments when you thought you were failing because the struggle did not end quickly, but the length of the test did not determine failure. Sometimes length is evidence of depth. You were shown who you truly are when finish lines disappeared, when timelines dissolved, when rewards were no longer visible, and in that space you did not lose yourself. You learned how to live without constant reassurance. That was not easy. It required trust, not anchored to good feelings or visible outcomes. You did not know this was the final test, because final tests rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, after many others evaluating what has truly been learned along the way. This test asked, will you continue when the path becomes ordinary? Will you continue when excitement fades? Will you continue when there is nothing new to motivate you? And you continued. Consistency became your strength. I saw your quiet courage. I saw you resist the urge to numb yourself. I saw you sit with discomfort rather than escape it. I saw you choose reflection over distraction. Those choices refined you. They made you steadier, calmer, more aware. You are no longer the person you were at the beginning of this season. You may not feel victorious, but you are more grounded, and that is victory. You may wonder why I did not tell you sooner. Why I did not mark the moment more clearly, but recognition was not the reward of this test. Formation was. Had you known it was a test, you might have tried to perform. Instead, you lived honestly, and that honesty carried you through. You succeeded not because you never failed, but because you refused to abandon your values when they became inconvenient. You passed because you chose truth over comfort. You passed because you remained willing to learn even when tired of relearning the same lesson. You passed because you stayed connected, imperfect but faithful. There were days you felt unseen, days you wondered whether anyone noticed your effort. I noticed. I counted every quiet victory, every moment you chose not to quit, every time you told yourself you would try again tomorrow. Those moments were the heart of the test, and that is why you passed even though you were not perfect. I need you to hear this clearly because silence has a way of rewriting memory. When answers do not come, when voices fade, when support feels distant, silence can convince you that you were abandoned, that what you experienced was neglect, that you were left to figure things out on your own because you were not important enough to be held closely. But what you experienced was not abandonment. It was preparation. I did not pull away because I wanted you isolated. I did not step back because you were unworthy of support. And I never turned away from you. I needed you to walk through that season alone because there are things that cannot be learned while surrounded. There are strengths that cannot form while constantly being reassured. There is clarity that only emerges when external voices quiet long enough for you to hear what has been forming inside you all along. There were people you expected to stand beside you who did not. Relationships shifted without explanation. Conversations became shallow where they once felt deep. And when you reached out, you sometimes felt unseen, unheard, unsupported. In those moments, you questioned yourself. You asked whether you had done something wrong. You wondered if you were too much or not enough. You replayed conversations, searching for the moment everything changed. But what felt like loss was actually space being created. Space is uncomfortable when you do not understand its purpose. It feels empty. It feels unnecessary. It feels like something has been taken from you. But space is essential when something new is forming. Without space, growth is restricted. Without space, you would have continued shrinking yourself to remain understood. I needed you alone because you were learning how to stand without leaning. For a long time, you found strength in being understood, in being affirmed, in being surrounded. None of that was wrong. But those foundations are fragile. They shift with mood, season, and circumstance. They disappear when people misunderstand you or fail to show up. I was building something sturdier within you. When voices around you quieted, it forced you to listen inward. When encouragement faded, it revealed what was truly sustaining you. When you felt misunderstood, it exposed how deeply you depended on explanation to feel safe. That exposure was not meant to shame you. It was meant to free you. You were being invited to place your worth somewhere deeper than human reaction, somewhere steadier than approval, somewhere that could not be withdrawn when expectations changed. I know how heavy that felt. I know there were nights when the silence was louder than any noise. Nights when you replayed conversations wondering whether saying things differently might have kept people closer. Nights when you believed clarity could have saved what distance dissolved. But clarity was never the issue. Timing and alignment were. Some people can only walk with you to a certain depth. Beyond that, their presence would have required you to constantly explain yourself, dilute your truth, or delay your growth to maintain comfort. I would not ask that of you. I needed you alone because you were learning discernment. Discernment sharpens in stillness. It grows clearer when fewer external influences compete for your attention. When surrounded, it is easy to confuse agreement with truth. When alone, truth becomes clearer because it no longer has to compete with noise. You began to recognize what brought peace to your soul, not what pleased others. You began to trust what settled you rather than what was popular or familiar. There were moments when you felt invisible, as though your absence would not be noticed by anyone. That pain cut deeply. But being invisible to others does not mean you were unseen by me. In fact, some of the most important formation happens without an audience. When no one is watching, you discover who you are without performance. When no one applauds, you learn how to choose integrity without reward. When no one affirms, you learn how to keep going without recognition. That strength cannot be taught any other way. I needed you alone because you were still learning the difference between connection and dependence. Dependence feels like closeness, but it quietly erodes trust both in yourself and in me. You were learning how to stand without constantly borrowing stability from others. Not because support is wrong, but because support should strengthen you, not replace your foundation. You felt misunderstood because you were changing. Growth often creates distance before it creates harmony. The language you were learning no longer fit the conversations around you. The questions you were asking did not align with familiar answers. That mismatch felt lonely, but it was also a sign that you were moving forward. Remaining surrounded would have slowed your development. And I would not ask you to stay small for the sake of comfort. I heard the prayers where you asked to be rescued from loneliness. Sometimes the answer was not removal of loneliness, but meaning within it. Loneliness can feel empty, but it can also clarify. It reveals what you cling to. It shows you what you fear losing. It teaches you what truly sustains you when everything else is stripped away. During that season, I was closer than you realized. I did not fill the silence with noise because noise would have distracted you from what was forming. I held steady while you learned how to sit with yourself without judgment. I watched you become more reflective, more compassionate, more honest. Those qualities form in stillness. You learned how to pray without performing. You learned how to speak honestly instead of impressively. You learned how to admit exhaustion instead of pretending strength. Those prayers reached me deeply because they were real. You were no longer praying to be seen. You were praying to be sustained. I needed you to replace reliance on external validation with internal assurance. Validation rises and falls. It depends on others' availability, understanding, and mood. Internal assurance rooted in my presence remains steady. As you learned how to sit beside me without needing constant affirmation, something in you settled. You became less reactive, less desperate for explanation, more grounded. This season also cultivated empathy. Now you recognize loneliness in others without words. You understand silence without judging it. You listen differently because you know what it feels like to be unseen. That empathy will matter more than you realize. It will shape how you love, how you lead, how you respond. I did not remove everyone from your life. I refined your circle. I allowed distance where closeness would have hindered growth, and I preserved connection where it could evolve alongside you instead of holding you back. Refinement is not rejection. It is precision. You were not meant to remain alone forever. This was a season, not a sentence. And seasons have purpose. The purpose of this one was to strengthen your foundation, to teach you how to stand when support feels fragile, to show you that being alone does not mean being abandoned. It means being prepared. You now know how to sit with silence without escaping it. You know how to listen without panic. You know how to trust without constant reassurance. Those are not small things. They are signs of maturity, and they form only when no one else can interfere with the process. I needed you to walk this season alone so that when you walk with others again, you will do so freely without fear, without clinging, without shrinking yourself to be understood. You will no longer accept relationships that require you to abandon truth. You will choose connections rooted in sincerity, not performance. You were not abandoned. You were refined. You were not forgotten. You were prepared. And because you walked through that season, you are now steadier, clearer, less dependent on approval, more deeply rooted in truth. That is why what comes next will feel different. You will not need to chase. You will not need to prove. You will walk with quiet confidence, knowing you can stand whether others walk beside you or not. I was with you every step, even when you felt alone. And the strength you carry now is proof that loneliness was never empty. It was sacred. While you were struggling, I was observing things you never realized were being measured. I was not looking for perfection. I was not counting how many times you felt strong or how often you succeeded. I was not keeping score of your achievements. I was watching your heart. I was watching who you became when there was no comfort, no reassurance, no applause, and no clear outcome to reward your effort. I was watching how you held yourself together when no one was there to hold you. You assumed that struggle meant something was wrong, that difficulty meant failure, that unanswered questions meant you were falling behind. But struggle was not evidence of deficiency. It was the environment where your readiness was quietly being revealed. I was not measuring how fast you moved forward. I was observing how you stood still. I watched how you treated yourself when answers did not come, when clarity delayed longer than you expected, when silence stretched past what felt bearable. Those moments mattered more than you know. When pressure increased quietly, I watched your posture internally, not externally. I watched how you spoke to yourself in private. I watched whether your inner voice became cruel or remained honest. I watched whether frustration hardened you or softened you. These were not small details. They were the center of the test. I observed how you reacted when progress became invisible, when days passed without signs of advancement, when effort felt disconnected from results. In those moments, you could have decided that nothing mattered. You could have withdrawn. You could have stopped caring to protect yourself from disappointment, but you did not. You stayed present. You stayed engaged even when motivation faded. You stayed open even when understanding thinned. You stayed willing even when confidence wavered. That willingness mattered. I watched how you handled disappointment. Disappointment reveals what lies beneath discipline. When expectations collapsed, did you become bitter? Did you turn inward with honesty or outward with blame? You felt the disappointment deeply. You did not deny it. You did not pretend you were unaffected. But you also did not allow it to define you. You did not allow it to strip you of compassion or humility. That restraint was not weakness. It was maturity forming under pressure. I observed how you sat with discomfort instead of numbing it. You felt the temptation to distract yourself endlessly, to fill every quiet space with noise to avoid reflection. You felt the pull toward anything that would dull the edge of uncertainty. But many times you resisted. You chose to sit with discomfort. You chose reflection over escape. You chose awareness over avoidance. Those choices shaped you more than any visible success ever could. I watched what you did when nothing forced you to do the right thing, when shortcuts would not be noticed, when compromise would not be exposed, when you could have quietly lowered your standards without consequence. And yet, you chose integrity. You chose consistency in private. You chose honesty when no one required it. You chose alignment when deviation would have been easier. Those private choices carry weight. I was not impressed by moments when you appeared strong. I was moved by moments when you remained real, when you admitted confusion, when you acknowledged fatigue, when you recognized limits without abandoning yourself. I watched how you responded to doubt. Doubt itself did not disqualify you. What mattered was how you handled it. You questioned. You wrestled. You asked why. But you did not let doubt turn into accusation. You did not let uncertainty turn into cynicism. You did not decide that silence meant absence. You continued the relationship even when clarity faded. You continued listening even when guidance felt quiet. That persistence revealed trust, not blind trust, but earned trust formed through experience. I observed how you spoke when you were tired. Words spoken in exhaustion often reveal the deepest beliefs. In those moments, I listened closely. Did you speak to yourself with hopelessness? Did you reduce yourself to your fatigue? Did you define yourself by what you could not give? You were not always gentle, but you learned how to stop before despair took over. You learned how to name pain without making it your identity. You learned how to rest without condemning yourself. That learning mattered. I observed how you treated others while you were hurting. Pain often narrows vision. It tempts people to become self-protective, impatient, harsh. But even in your exhaustion, you did not lose your capacity for kindness. You noticed others. You listened. You showed care even when you felt empty. That was not obligation. That was character. I watched how you handled the desire to control outcomes. Control can masquerade as effort, but it often hides fear. I watched as you gradually recognized that not everything could be fixed by pushing harder. You learned how to release control without giving up responsibility. You learned how to trust timing without abandoning effort. That shift was subtle but essential. You believed you were being punished because things felt so heavy. But punishment focuses on failure. What you were experiencing focused on formation. I was not testing your worth. I was observing whether you could carry weight without losing yourself. I watched how you managed expectations, especially the expectations you placed on yourself. You had timelines, you had plans, you had ideas of how things should unfold. And when those timelines dissolved, I watched whether you clung tightly or loosened your grip. You did not give up. You adapted. Adaptation is not surrender. It is intelligence shaped by humility. I observed how you returned after moments of discouragement. Doubt came and went. Fatigue rose and fell. There were moments you pulled back emotionally, but you returned. Sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but you returned. That return mattered more than uninterrupted confidence ever could. I observed your humility. Humility is not self-rejection. It is honesty without performance. You admitted when you were tired. You admitted when you were confused. You admitted when you needed help. That honesty created space for growth. Pride would have closed that space, but you chose openness. I observed whether you remained willing to learn. Difficulty can make people rigid. It can make them defensive. It can make them cling to being right. But you allowed difficulty to soften you. You listened. You reflected. You adjusted. You did not cling to correctness. You clung to truth. That posture allows wisdom to take root. You believed struggle meant you were failing. But what I observed told a different story. I saw someone learning to stand without applause. Someone learning to trust without proof. Someone learning to live fully without certainty. Those qualities determine readiness for what comes next. I did not care how quickly you escaped hardship. I cared how deeply you were shaped within it. I was not counting your mistakes. I was observing your resilience. You were not being evaluated for rejection. You were being evaluated for responsibility. Responsibility requires steadiness. It requires humility. It requires trust that does not collapse under pressure. You demonstrated those qualities quietly, imperfectly, but sincerely. That is why you passed what you did not know was being tested. Not because you were flawless, but because you were faithful in ways that mattered. I saw the moments no one applauded. I saw the decisions no one acknowledged. I saw the strength no one labeled as strength, and I counted them. Every time you stayed when leaving was easier. Every time you chose truth over comfort. Every time you continued without certainty. Those moments were the evidence. You were not overlooked. You were not forgotten. You were not delayed without purpose. You were being prepared quietly, precisely, thoroughly. And now, because of what was formed when no one else was watching, you are ready for what comes next. What changed between us was not distance. It was closeness. You may have felt as though I was quiet, as though I stepped back, as though the guidance you once sensed clearly became subtle, restrained, almost indistinguishable from your own thoughts. You may have wondered whether something had shifted in a way that required you to work harder, prove more, or carry weight you were not ready to hold. But the truth is simpler and deeper. What changed was not pressure. What changed was trust. Before this season, guidance had to come gently, carefully, in fragments you could hold without being overwhelmed. You were still learning how to listen without fear, how to receive without rushing, how to trust without demanding immediate clarity. Now something has shifted. Not because you became perfect, not because you stopped questioning, but because you became steady. Passing this test did not move you farther away from me. It brought you closer, close enough that communication no longer needs to be loud, close enough that direction no longer needs to be repeated, close enough that silence no longer feels like abandonment. Trust allows for a different kind of relationship. It allows me to speak to you directly, without buffering every word through reassurance. It allows guidance to be quieter because your heart no longer panics in uncertainty. It allows clarity to arrive without overwhelming you. This is not because you suddenly know everything. It is because you can now hold more. You are not the same person you were at the beginning of this season. You may not feel dramatically different, but you are more grounded. Your inner world is less reactive. Your decisions are less driven by fear and more shaped by awareness. That did not happen overnight. It happened day by day, through difficulty, through waiting, through choosing to stay present when nothing seemed to be happening. You were not being distanced. You were being entrusted. Trust does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with ceremony. It is built quietly through consistency, honesty, and presence over time. You demonstrated that. You did not disappear when things became unclear. You did not harden when disappointment came. You did not demand answers when silence remained. You stayed. And because you stayed, the nature of our connection changed. There is a difference between being guided and being trusted. Guidance is necessary when stability is still forming. Trust emerges when stability has taken root. Guidance explains. Trust assumes understanding. Guidance repeats. Trust allows space. This is why things feel different now. You may notice that answers do not come in the same way. That direction feels less external and more internal. That clarity often comes after action instead of before it. This is not confusion. It is permission. Permission to move without second-guessing every step. Permission to trust the discernment that has been formed within you. Permission to act without needing constant confirmation. If you misinterpret this shift, you may think you are under pressure again. You may think you need to strive harder, prove more, or endure longer. But that would be misunderstanding what has changed. You are not being pushed. You are being trusted. Trust means I no longer need to hold everything tightly for you. It means I can allow you to carry responsibility without fear that it will crush you. It means I can let you move freely without constant correction. Not because you will never make mistakes, but because you will not lose yourself when you do. You have demonstrated that you can remain honest under pressure, that you can stay humble without shrinking, that you can carry weight without becoming hardened. Those are not small qualities. They are the foundation of trust. You once needed clarity before movement. Now you are learning to move with partial clarity and allow understanding to follow. That does not mean recklessness. It means confidence rooted in relationship rather than control. You are learning to walk without constant explanation, to act without rehearsing defense, to make decisions without fear that being misunderstood will undo you. This is what maturity feels like. Not certainty, but steadiness. You may feel the temptation to return to old patterns of self-doubt, to question whether you are truly ready, to wonder whether this new level of responsibility is too much. But remember this, nothing that is coming requires you to strain. If strain returns, it is not a signal to push harder. It is a signal to re-anchor in trust. Because what lies ahead is not something you must earn again. It is something you are prepared to receive. Trust also means accountability, not the kind that pressures, but the kind that dignifies. I can rely on you now in ways I could not before. Not because you are flawless, but because you are truthful. Not because you are fearless, but because you are faithful in unseen ways. You have been loyal in small things, in quiet decisions, in private integrity. That loyalty created capacity. Trust does not ask whether you will always feel ready. It asks whether you will remain present, even when you feel uncertain. You have shown that you will. This is why communication now feels different. There will be fewer signs, but more understanding. Fewer reassurances, but deeper peace. Less urgency, but more clarity. If you resist this shift, you may feel disoriented. You may long for the old patterns of confirmation. But those patterns belong to an earlier version of you. They are no longer necessary. You have grown beyond needing constant validation to move forward. You have developed discernment that can guide you quietly. You have learned how to listen without panic. That is trust at work. You are not being asked to perform. You are not being asked to endure another test. You are not being asked to prove your worth again. You are being invited to walk differently, with less fear, with more awareness, with quiet confidence rather than visible struggle. This is not the removal of responsibility. It is the deepening of it. Responsibility feels lighter now because it is no longer carried with insecurity. It rests on trust rather than tension. You may notice that what once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. That what once caused anxiety now invites reflection. That what once demanded reassurance now allows peace. This is the fruit of what was formed in you. Trust also means proximity. I am closer than before, not farther. But closeness does not always feel loud. It often feels subtle, steady, and calm. Closeness allows for fewer words. It allows for silence without fear. It allows for guidance that feels intuitive rather than imposed. You are learning to recognize this closeness not through emotional intensity but through consistency. You are not alone in this next season. You are not unprepared. You are not stepping forward blindly. You are stepping forward with a relationship that has deepened through honesty, endurance, and quiet faithfulness. This shift is why I needed you to understand what you just came through. Without that understanding, you might misinterpret trust as abandonment. You might confuse permission with pressure. But now you know. What changed between us is not distance. It is confidence in who you have become. You are no longer being handled with caution. You are being engaged with respect. And respect changes everything. It allows movement without fear. It allows growth without strain. It allows partnership rather than mere direction. This is not a season of proving. It is a season of participating. Participating with awareness, with humility, with steadiness. And if you ever feel uncertain again, remember this: trust does not mean you will never question. It means questions will no longer undo you. You have passed the test that made this possible. And because of that, what comes next will feel different, not heavier, not harsher, not more demanding, but more aligned. That is what trust does. Before you take another step forward, I need you to pause, not because you are unready, but because understanding must come before movement. If you move ahead without recognizing what has changed, you will misinterpret what unfolds next. You will mistake permission for pressure. You will mistake growth for burden, and you will carry an old weight into a season that was never meant to hold it. Do not do that to yourself. You have spent a long time bracing for disappointment. You learned how to protect your heart by lowering expectations. You learned how to stay guarded, how to prepare for loss, how to soften hope before it could hurt you again. Those defenses were not wrong. They served a purpose. They kept you standing when everything felt uncertain. But that season has done its work. What once protected you will now limit you if you keep carrying it forward. You are stepping into something new, and new seasons require new posture. Not effort awareness. Not striving alignment. Not proving trust. If you move ahead still questioning your readiness, you will misread the invitations placed before you. You will assume you need to work harder, push more, prove again. You will feel pressure where there is actually permission. You will feel strain where there is meant to be flow. That is why I am saying this now. Do not carry old doubt into a new season. Old doubt asks, what if I am not enough? New awareness answers, you are prepared. Old doubt asks, what if I fail again? New awareness answers, you are no longer who you were. Old doubt expects struggle as proof of worth. New awareness recognizes readiness without spectacle. You are not being asked to endure again. You are not being asked to prove that you can survive. You already demonstrated that. What lies ahead is not about endurance. It is about receiving. Receiving requires a different posture than surviving. Survival keeps you tight. Receiving requires openness. Survival teaches you to brace. Receiving teaches you to trust. If you remain braced, you will misinterpret calm as danger. You will question ease. You will wonder why things feel different and assume something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Something has changed. You are no longer moving through a season that demands constant resistance. You are entering one that requires discernment, presence, and confidence in what has already been formed within you. Do not mistake this shift for pressure. Pressure says you must become more. Permission says you are ready to step forward. Pressure drains. Permission steadies. If you do not recognize the difference, you will carry unnecessary weight. You will try to earn what is already being offered. You will overextend in places that require trust, not effort. You have nothing left to prove. You have already passed through the shaping. What comes next is not heavier, it is deeper. And depth does not ask for force. It asks for understanding. You may notice that expectations feel different now. That responsibility feels present but not overwhelming. That movement feels possible without panic. That clarity arrives quietly instead of dramatically. That is not because standards have lowered. It is because you have risen. You are no longer being trained through resistance. You are being guided through relationship. That requires less noise, less urgency, less explanation. If you cling to old doubt, you will look for confirmation that is no longer necessary. You will wait for signs that have already been replaced by discernment. You will question yourself unnecessarily. You do not need to rehearse fear to stay safe anymore. Safety now comes from stability, not vigilance. You may feel tempted to tell yourself, I should not trust this ease, or I must be missing something, or this feels unfamiliar, maybe I am wrong. Unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. Different does not mean dangerous. It means you have grown. If you bring old doubt forward, you will diminish your own capacity. You will hesitate where confidence is needed. You will delay where readiness is present. Do not shrink yourself back into a season you have already outgrown. You are allowed to move forward without anxiety. You are allowed to trust what has been formed in you. You are allowed to act without constant self-interrogation. That is not arrogance. That is maturity. This season will not ask you to relive old battles. It will ask you to apply what you learned. It will ask you to walk with awareness instead of survival instinct. You do not need to defend your growth. You do not need to justify your steadiness. You do not need to explain why you are no longer struggling in the same ways. Let old doubt fall away. It no longer fits you. What comes next will feel lighter, not because it is less meaningful, but because you are no longer carrying unnecessary fear. Responsibility feels different when it rests on trust instead of insecurity. You may still feel moments of uncertainty. That is normal. Growth does not eliminate questions. It changes how they affect you. Questions no longer dismantle you. They invite reflection rather than panic. That is the difference. Do not return to old narratives that told you struggle was the only sign of progress. Do not believe that ease means complacency. Do not assume that quiet means stagnation. Some of the most meaningful growth happens without friction. You are not moving backward. You are moving forward with less resistance, and that is intentional. This season does not demand that you prove your faith through suffering. It invites you to live from the strength that suffering already produced. You have learned how to stand. Now you are learning how to walk freely. If you bring old doubt with you, you will misread what is happening. You will think you need to prepare for collapse instead of participating in expansion. You are not being set up to fail. You are being invited to trust. Trust does not mean blind confidence. It means grounded confidence. Confidence rooted in lived experience, not wishful thinking. You know what you have endured. You know what you did not abandon. You know who you remained when no one was watching. Let that knowledge steady you. Do not carry old doubt into a new season. You do not need to prove that you deserve what is unfolding. You do not need to rehearse fear to be responsible. You do not need to struggle to validate growth. You have already done the work. Now allow yourself to move forward differently, with less defense, with more clarity, with quiet confidence. That is how this season is meant to be entered. You are standing here now not because you were unbreakable, but because you were willing to grow. The victory you reached does not look like what you expected. There was no ceremony, no moment where everything suddenly made sense, no loud confirmation announcing that you had crossed the finish line. Instead, it feels quiet, and that is how you know it is real. This victory did not arrive as excitement. It arrived as steadiness. It arrived as the ability to breathe without bracing. It arrived as the subtle awareness that what once overwhelmed you no longer holds the same power. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. You remained when disappearing would have felt safer. You continued when nothing around you suggested progress. That was the test, and that was the victory. You thought victory would feel like relief, but relief fades quickly. What you have gained lasts. You gained resilience without hardness, faith without performance, strength without arrogance. You gained the ability to remain. Remaining is not passive. Remaining is courageous. Remaining means you did not run when answers were delayed. You did not abandon yourself when clarity was absent. You did not close your heart when disappointment tempted you to protect it. Remaining required more strength than leaving ever would have. This is the victory no one applauded. No one marked the day you chose honesty instead of comfort. No one saw the nights you stayed awake choosing reflection over numbness. No one recorded the moments you resisted bitterness when it felt justified. But those moments shaped you. You were not tested on how loudly you could believe. You were tested on how faithfully you could remain present. And you remained. That is why you are here. You are not standing at the end of something. You are standing at the threshold of continuity. What comes next does not erase what came before. It grows from it. You do not need to prove that you have changed. Change is already evident in how you respond, in how you listen, in how you trust, without demanding certainty. You are calmer, not because life is easier, but because you are steadier. You are less reactive, not because you care less, but because you understand more. You are quieter, not because you are diminished, but because you are grounded. This is the fruit of the unseen work. There were days you believed nothing was happening. Days you assumed you were stuck. Days you wondered whether the silence meant absence. But now you can see. Something was always happening. Formation rarely announces itself. It does not demand recognition. It works quietly, reshaping foundations rather than surfaces. You were being formed to carry more without becoming heavier, to be trusted without being controlled, to walk forward without needing constant reassurance. This is not the end of effort, but it is the end of striving born from insecurity. You will still move. You will still choose. You will still grow. But you will no longer do so from fear of not being enough. The invitation now is simple. Remain. Remain present even when life becomes ordinary again. Remain honest even when integrity goes unnoticed. Remain open even when silence returns. The test does not end because the lessons continue, but the weight has shifted. You are no longer being shaped through resistance. You are being guided through trust. Remaining does not mean staying still forever. It means staying connected as you move. It means not abandoning yourself when things feel simple. It means not seeking struggle to validate your worth. You do not need chaos to feel alive. You do not need pressure to feel purposeful. You do not need pain to prove faith. Quiet faith is stronger than dramatic belief. You are invited to remain not because you are fragile, but because you are ready. Ready to walk forward without rehearsing failure. Ready to act without anticipating collapse. Ready to receive without suspicion. You may still encounter moments of doubt. That does not undo what has been formed. Doubt no longer defines you. It informs you, then passes. You may still feel tired at times. That does not mean regression. It means you are human. Rest is no longer a threat to your progress. You may still feel alone occasionally. That does not mean abandonment. It means you know how to stand without panic. This is the quiet victory. Not that everything worked out exactly as you hoped, but that you did not lose yourself along the way. You did not trade truth for comfort. You did not trade compassion for protection. You did not trade connection for control. You became trustworthy not because you were flawless, but because you were faithful in small, unseen ways. That faithfulness created capacity. And now the path ahead does not demand that you struggle to earn what you have already been prepared to receive. You are not being sent forward blindly. You are not being asked to carry what will crush you. You are not being left to figure everything out alone. You are being invited to walk with awareness, with steadiness, with humility, with quiet confidence. The victory is not that you survived. The victory is that you matured. You did not just endure, you became. And becoming does not end here. So remain. Remain connected. Remain grounded. Remain open. Let your strength stay gentle. Let your confidence stay quiet. Let your faith stay steady. The work that mattered most was done when no one was watching. And now, as you step forward, you do so not with fear, not with doubt, not with pressure, but with the understanding that you have already passed what needed to be passed. This is not a dramatic ending. It is a true one, and it is enough.